Hi there, BookTube, it's Roz, and I've been doing some wonderful reading for this year's victober. But one of the things that really kind of struck me in the Victorian writing that I've been reading this year, mostly novels, but also quite a lot of plays, is the extent to which Victorian writers were unashamedly happy to use plot devices, plot twists like coincidence, misunderstandings, cases of mistaken identity, people not recognising, those kind of like, to a level that a modern reader reading a modern novel or play would just, we wouldn't swallow it. But I think, we do swallow it a bit more when we're reading it in Victorian work. And obviously, Victorian audiences were very comfortable with it. Well, it's so frequent that it was obviously something that they felt happy with and or perhaps even expected. It worked for sort of melodrama and comedy and sensation and that they enjoyed. I mean, I always think it's a bit ridiculous to grumble about a coincidence in a piece of fiction, because sometimes, it's only the story it is because of that. Like you have to assume there's other versions of events where that plot twist doesn't happen, and so there isn't any plot. In Tess of the D'Urbervilles, say that note that Tess wrote didn't get slipped accidentally under the rug when she put it under the door. Maybe she'd have had the chance to have a happy marriage with some other less judgmental man. I'm trying to avoid spoilers generally in this video. If Oliver Twist had been accused of picking the pocket of some other random London gentleman and not Mr. Brownlow, then there wouldn't be a story. He'd just be a statistic of, Victorian, child from the workhouse who ends up a criminal. It's sometimes you need that to get your story going, don't you? But and that's true in modern novels too. But both those books, both Hardy's Tess and Dickens's Oliver Twist, have a number of other real whopping kind of coincidences and plot twists in there that as I say, I think we would be surprised if we found them in a book today. Why were Victorians so comfortable with this? I mean, as I say, partly it's just a matter of taste. I think there's also something about being happy to have, I don't know, kind of like fate or providence playing a part in a story. And, if we think of one of the most outrageous kind of coincidence-y, plot twisty things in a Victorian novel, the most, infamous almost, I think that's the explanation. So I'm talking about Jane Eyre. And again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but there is a moment in the novel Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte, where Jane's life is thrown into disarray. She's running away from something. She crosses the country. She ends up sleeping rough for a couple of nights. She's in great distress. She winds up on the doorstep of a remote cottage, miles from anywhere she's been in her life before, and is taken in by two women who we subsequently find out are her long-lost cousins that she knew nothing about. Of all, what were the chances of that happening? But it makes sense in Jane Eyre because I guess there's that sense of Providence looking out for Jane, that she deserves a break and she gets it. So yeah, it makes it okay for a Victorian reader and then okay for us, I think, as we read it now. But sometimes we do struggle a bit with some of those. I'd be interested in your opinion on that. Anyway, this has really got me thinking about this topic. And one of the things that I've noticed, I suppose, is how the Victorians used that for kind of like comic effect, these sort of plot twists. So I'm reading Pickwick Papers at the moment, and in the earlier chapters of Pickwick Papers, there's this brilliant character, Mr. Jingle, and Pickwick and his three friends are making these sort of going travelling around south of England, and it seems like everywhere they go, Mr. Jingle pops up. And, you know, it's ridiculous. He couldn't possibly have always been there, you know, coincidentally, you know, but it works in comic terms. It's like a running joke, I suppose. And that, you know, yeah, makes it seem, yes, ridiculous, but in a funny way. Another kind of example of how it kind of, that sort of daft coincidence works in a comic story would be in Oscar Wilde. I mean, he uses a few, but the absolute classic would be in The Importance of Being Earnest, when, and again, I'm avoiding spoilers here, when late in the play, we discover the identity of the baby that was, you know, left in a handbag, as Lady Braddon puts it, who caused that to happen, and hence we discover the real parents of this character, and it gives the play a beautifully neat ending in a way that is funny and satisfying, and, you know, so, but ridiculous. Another kind of, I suppose, variation on that plot device, you know, is, rather than a coincidence, is the misunderstanding. And we get one that's a kind of key to the plot in Pickwick Papers, where Mr. Pickwick is talking to his landlady about the fact that he's thinking of hiring a manservant and would like that person to come and live with him. But the way he goes about terribly politely explaining that, she gets, we don't quite understand how, she gets the idea that he's actually proposing to her. And this is crucial to the whole plot of the novel. But it happens early on. It's not a spoiler. It's ludicrous, but it works because it's funny. And then it makes a whole load of later events possible. Other misunderstandings seem a bit more ridiculous. Back to Wilde again, A Woman of No Importance. For that play to work, we have to accept that this young woman who's married for love has had a really happy 2 years of marriage with her husband. You know, they're like soulmates, you know. And then someone comes and tells her something, and she gets a little bit of supporting evidence, and she just decides, oh yes, obviously my husband has a mistress, you know, and it seems like really out of character for her to just suddenly think that, even though, you know, she's given, you know, a couple of reasons to, but she doesn't sort of like say, oh no, this can't be right, I love him and he loves me, and, you know, and she doesn't talk to him about it. It's no, in order to set up the play, you know, we have to accept this twist. Our group read this year for Victober was The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and that there's a similarly sort of crazy misunderstanding or misinterpretation of events in that, which a number of people in the group read group have remarked on. So for this plot to work, we have to believe that a woman in her mid-20s who's married has a kind of a relationship with another man, not her husband, in which he's, you know, lending her books, meeting her for walks, discussing poetry with her, holding her hand, you know, kind of going out of his way to build a relationship with her. And we have to believe that she honestly doesn't think there's anything sexual in it. You know, that it's a kind of platonic love from this sort of dashing young man, just, you know, a few years older than her. Oh, really? And Braddon gives us a logic for that around the kind of books that this woman's read. But, you know, it's touch and go, I think, as to whether, as a reader, you can swallow that one. Some of the most extreme kind of plot devices of that sort of the sort of misunderstanding or misinterpretation of things are about cases of mistaken identity, and it can be used wonderfully for comic effect. And I read London Assurance this victober by Dion Boucicault, and in that we are asked to believe that Sir Courtly Harcourt turns up at a house in the country that he's going to visit, and his son is there, and that he accepts the pretense that this is not his son, that this is just some other chap who looks extraordinarily like him. Now, okay, that's comedy, and that's used for brilliant effect, and it's fast, but it's superb. I loved it. But my sort of nomination for the most ridiculous plot device of all that I've read this year, and that I think I've ever come across in Victorian novel or play, is in a play I read called Afternoon by Ouida. That's Marie-Louise Ramée. Okay, so this play, Afternoon, is a lovely play, sparkling dialogue, great setting in Italy, lots going for it, including a kind of nice sort of feminist sort of twist of don't judge women by their appearances, or treat them like, I don't know, objet d'art, say. But in order for this play to work, all right, what you have to accept is that a man could court, marry, live with for a year a young wife, leave her behind in France, believe she's dead, and then meet her 12 years later, spend a load of time with her and not recognise her. I mean, how long is 12 years? I know we change, but that much? Yes, she's using a different name and he thought she was dead, but, surely he'd be saying, gosh, you seem awfully like that woman I was married to 12 years ago. Okay, so that is my nomination for the most ridiculous Victorian plot device that I've ever read. But I would love to hear what's yours. There's plenty. I mean, Dickens loved a coincidence or a case of mistaken identity or misunderstanding. What about the ending of Great Expectations, for example? Would that be your number one? Or in David Copperfield, where Steerforth ends up shipwrecked. Why was it that particular beach when David just happened to be in the vicinity? So, or even the most sort of elegant and polished of Victorian writers like George Eliot, managed to, in Daniel Deronda, throw in some real corkers of this sort of plot twist in order to bring her story to a satisfying conclusion. So, what's your favourite? What's your most outrageous plot device in Victorian writing? Or if you're not a Victorian writer, what's a reader of Victorian writing? Any others in other more recent fiction that you'd like to share in the comments or make a video about for all that? And what's your feeling about that sort of plot device in fiction? Are you more willing to accept it in an older book, in a classic, or is it anathema to you in wherever you find it, or is it something that, like a Victorian reader, you quite enjoy?